If leaving duties unperformed we run after rights, they'll escape us like a will-o'-the-wisp. That's a pretty heavy quote from Mahatma Gandhi, right? He's essentially saying, if we're just out here demanding what we're owed without actually stepping up and doing what we owe to society, we're chasing an illusion, just a total phantom. Today, we're unpacking that exact tension, the push and pull between what a country guarantees you and what it expects right back.
Welcome to The Explainer. I am so excited to get into today's topic with you all. We're diving deep into a fascinating and honestly often forgotten half of the Indian Constitution, our fundamental duties. We spend a ton of time talking about our rights, and obviously rightly so, but the true balance of power in any thriving democracy relies heavily on the duties of its citizens.
Here's a quick roadmap for today's explainer. First, the illusion of rights. Second, the birth of fundamental duties. Third, the flag and the anthem. Fourth, how rights and duties are intertwined. And finally, should duties be enforced?
Let's jump straight into Section 1, the illusion of rights, rooted in ancient wisdom.
So way before a formal constitution even existed, the concepts of dharma and karma were already absolutely central to Indian thought. And we're not just talking about abstract spirituality here. These ancient scriptures literally laid the groundwork for modern civic responsibility. They built this deep ingrained sense of obligation, not just looking out for yourself, but caring for your family, your community, your society, and, even the larger cosmos. It was basically the original blueprint for active civic engagement long before we had a word for it.
Moving on to Section 2, Birth of Fundamental Duties, which was really a constitutional course correction.
Okay, check this out. Back in 1950, the original Constitution actually didn't even have a chapter on the fundamental duties of citizens. It was strictly about rights. It wasn't until 1976, during the 42nd Amendment, that 10 fundamental duties were officially added, all based on recommendations from the Swaran Singh Committee. Fast forward to 2002, and the 86th Amendment added an 11th duty, this one mandating parents to provide education for their children between the ages of 6 and 14.
But here's a really surprising piece of history for you. While the government totally accepted the idea of listing these duties, they actually shot down some of the Swaran Singh Committee's harsher ideas. The committee originally wanted Parliament to have the power to impose strict legal penalties for noncompliance. They wanted to shield those punishments from judicial review, and get this, they even wanted to make paying taxes a fundamental duty. The government said a firm no way to all of that, deciding instead to keep these duties primarily as moral obligations.
So what actually made the cut? Well, Article 51A essentially gives us a micro-narrative of the ideal Indian citizen. It's quite a list. Respecting the Constitution and the flag, cherishing the freedom struggle, protecting the natural environment, having compassion for living creatures, developing a scientific temper, safeguarding public property, and just striving for excellence in general. It's essentially a comprehensive checklist for progressive nation building.
That brings us to Section 3, the flag and the anthem, symbols of a nation.
Article 51A explicitly tells us to respect the national flag. Now, back in 2004, the Supreme Court ruled that flying the flag is actually an integral part of your freedom of speech. But, of course, with that right comes a duty. The Flag Code of India from 2002 acts as a sort of manual for dignity. It tells us exactly how to display the flag respectfully. And while the code itself isn't a strict statutory law, there is a 1971 act that strictly criminalizes actual insults to the flag. We're talking about things like flying it at half-mast inappropriately or using it as a garment.
52. That is the maximum number of seconds an appropriate rendition of the national anthem should actually take. And just like the flag, standing for the anthem is a highly visible public test of civic duty. But man, has it sparked quite a debate over the years.
This whole anthem debate brilliantly highlights the tension between compulsion and freedom. On one side, you have supporters who argue that making it compulsory to stand for the anthem instills patriotism, national unity, and a shared collective morality. But on the other side, critics argue that true, genuine patriotism has to be voluntary. They feel that forcing it turns a meaningful symbolic act into just an empty ritual, which kind of undermines India's pluralistic ethos. And the judiciary has really mirrored this back and forth neutrally over the years. You've got the 1986 BGO Emanuel case upholding students' rights to abstain on religious grounds, all the way to the 2018 Choksi case, which initially made standing in cinemas mandatory before reversing course and saying, actually, no, it's optional.
All right, Section 4. Rights and duties intertwined. Two sides of the same coin.
So, absolutely crucial point here. We need to understand the difference between a legal duty and a fundamental duty. A legal duty, like paying taxes, is legally enforceable, meaning if you don't do it, there are direct penalties. But fundamental duties, those are non-justiciable.
You're not going to be dragged into a court of law simply because you failed to cherish the rich heritage of our composite culture, right? They are moral compasses. They act as guides rather than direct statutory laws, unless, of course, Parliament specifically passes a separate law to enforce one.
Now here is a fascinating little nuance that a lot of people actually miss. Some fundamental rights in the Indian Constitution do extend to foreigners who are living in or visiting the country. But Article 51A uniquely restricts fundamental duties only to the citizens of India. It makes it an exclusive responsibility. It's a reminder that shaping the destiny of the nation rests squarely and only on the shoulders of its own people.
No duties, no rights, no rights, no duties. You literally cannot have one without the other. Think about it this way. The Constitution guarantees the right to a clean environment, but you can't meaningfully exercise that right unless citizens perform their duty to actually protect and improve that environment. Or your right to freedom of speech. It completely relies on others performing their duty of tolerance. It's this perfectly symbiotic relationship.
Section 5. Should duties be enforced? The modern debate.
As you might guess, constitutional experts have plenty of critiques about the current setup. Because these duties are non-justiciable, some feel they are basically toothless. Plus, they use incredibly vague terms, like what exactly does composite culture mean in a strict legal sense? Critics also point out that highly critical duties, like the duty to vote or the duty to pay taxes, are totally missing from the list. And finally, because they're just tucked away as an appendix to Part 4 of the Constitution, a lot of experts argue their overall significance is drastically diminished.
This has all led to a pretty massive clash. Pro-enforcement voices, and this includes statements from political leaders and even Supreme Court judges, argue that focusing entirely on rights for decades while ignoring duties has kept the nation weak. They insist that duties absolutely must precede rights. On the flip side, you have the anti-enforcement view, championed by the Justice Verma Committee. They argue that blanket enforceability is just inefficient. Instead of locking people up, they suggest we should focus on educating the public and relying on specific, already existing laws, like the Wildlife Protection Act, for example, to handle violations more naturally.
And this debate gets even more interesting when we look at global inspiration, because India isn't alone in this. The genesis of these duties actually traces back to the USSR Constitution. Today, Japan stands out as the only democratic constitution that explicitly lays down citizen duties. And if you want a prime example of strict enforcement, just look at Singapore. Their remarkable transformation into a highly developed nation was heavily fueled by the state's relentless pursuit and strict enforcement of citizen duties.
Which brings us to the ultimate question we have to ask ourselves as we wrap up this explainer. If a democracy guarantees your rights, should it also mandate your duties? Think about it. Can a society truly thrive if its people are only consumers of freedom and not active producers of responsibility? It's an incredibly delicate balance between individual liberty and collective well-being, and it's one that we are still figuring out today. Thank you so much for joining me on The Explainer. Keep asking questions, and I'll see you next time.